I'm really pleased to be here to chat with you. It's great to see familiar faces in my little Zoom squares as well. So thank you very much. It's a subject of muscles I find really, really interesting, and I'm hoping that you find some information that's useful to you as well tonight. So I'm just going to share my screen so that you can have a look at the points that I'm going to be speaking to. There we go. Okay. So just an overview of what I'd like to talk to you about tonight is muscles and how we keep our muscles healthy and how they relate to our functional fitness levels and why that's important. I want to talk a little bit about, over time, how our muscles change, what we can do about that, and also give you a few starting points towards the end. So when I say muscles and functional fitness, just a word about what functional fitness is. This is the capacity that we have to do all of the sort of activities that we need to do throughout our usual routine of work and leisure and looking after our homes, gardens, and ourselves. It's driven by many factors. So all of our body systems are part of our capacity. But of course, I'm going to focus on our muscular system today. So these are the movements that our muscles do that we use all the time: squatting, reaching, pulling, pushing, lifting, and carrying. This is especially relevant to us as time goes on and we start to age. So a few things just to know about muscles. We have over 200 muscles in our body. They are large and small. We have very tiny muscles in many, many layers. And we have very large muscles as well, like the glutes or some of the muscles in our back. Our muscles do a couple of different things. So we have postural muscles that support our bones and stabilize movement for us as we move. And then we have our great big muscles that actually produce locomotion. And so they do the work of all the movements that I mentioned before: lifting, carrying, pushing, pulling, etc. Our muscles work by shortening and by contracting the muscle. I don't know if you can see this very well, but as an example, I've got my bicep here. If I was lifting something, this muscle would be shortening. However, when I return my imaginary weight to starting position, my muscle here is still working. So the bicep is working, shortening as I pull my arm up, and it is lengthening as I return to my starting position. So that is interesting, I think, because we actually retain the ability to have strength in that lengthening movement longer than we keep the shortening type of strength. So that is why in our exercise group at Norway House, I often say, so we want to lift slowly, but we also want to return to starting position in a slow and controlled way, because that trains the power of the muscle as it lengthens as well as shortens. So muscles have different capacities, and this is dictated by the different fibers inside the muscle itself. Muscles are capable of endurance, which is the ability to go on and on, to continue the same kind of movement over and over. And they also have the ability to produce strength in terms of lifting things, as well as power, which is when we combine that strength with speed. So in that sense, we would have a quick movement, a burst of power. And the reason that we want to be sure that we're aware of that as well is because we need to be able to produce power quickly, because we require that for balance, for locomotion. And interesting to note too, that as we age over time, the muscle fibers that are related to power are the first ones that start to decline. So we need to remember to train for strength as we get older, but also not to miss working on the power that our muscles can produce. And lastly, a really important thing is that our muscles respond to whatever demand we put upon them. When we ask a muscle to do some kind of work, if it's hard for us to do, over time the muscle will respond by becoming stronger. And that's a really important thing for us to know about muscle capacity, performance, and muscle health. So over the course of our lifetime, all of our systems, our cardiovascular system, our neural system, hormones, our endocrine system, our muscle system, all work to give us a functional capacity that peaks in our early adulthood. I am going to focus on the muscular system, but I just want to recognize that it works in conjunction with all these other things. Sorry. So we notice that on the left we have a functional capacity, and this is the sum total of all of those systems and our ability to function in an optimal way. But it is not long after we reach our 30s that we start to lose some of those abilities. There's physiological changes that happen, and that's depicted by the yellow line on the bottom. And if that is not checked, it just slowly increases until we get down to this level, this threshold of independence, which is where once our capacity reaches that level and below, we would need help. And this is at the end of the life where people end up in just care facilities. However, we want to see ourselves maintain the capacity that we have at our peak. And we are able to do that, which is what I'm going to talk about tonight. Because as we maintain this capacity, we will find ourselves aging where we have lots of reserve between our capacity and that threshold of independence. And ideally, we're going to arrive at the end of our life with a strong functional capacity so that we don't have to deal with loss of independence. So how are our muscles affected by this trajectory that happens over time? Well, I'm just going to start with what happens in the individual muscles. So on a cellular level, we do have cells that change with time inside our muscles. So one of these is called a satellite cell. This is a stem cell, in fact, that has the ability to produce a new cell that can turn into a muscle cell, so a muscle fiber. The purpose of these satellite cells then is to maintain and regenerate muscle fibers as tissue is damaged, if it is. Muscle cells also have little powerhouses, mitochondria they're called, and they take the oxygen that's delivered to the muscle and they translate that into the power that the muscle needs to contract. Both mitochondria and satellite cells over time become less efficient. There may be fewer of them. And particularly with regard to satellite cells, they may become dormant if they are not used. So if there is inactivity, we end up with fewer cells, and we end up with satellite cells that are not able to divide anymore. So that has quite a big impact towards the end of life if we've lost that ability to recreate the muscle fibers. Muscles also have a metabolic function, so they don't just lift things and move us around. They contribute to the metabolic functions of our body. They produce hormones and proteins and other substances that are used throughout the body to maintain health and metabolic benefits. So this is, for example, with regard to our blood sugar balance. We have factors that are produced by muscles as we exercise that migrate up to the brain and are involved in the renewal of or the growth of new neurons in one particular part of the brain, the hippocampus. And that's how we know that exercise benefits our brains and our memory, which is a very awesome thing. So that's what happens on a very cellular level across our lifetime. But there are some other things that happen that we do and don't have control of. So I want to move on and talk about those things. Muscle health is also influenced by time. We don't have control over the march of time, of course, and the physiological changes that happen to us over time. But we do have some control over how much of an effect those changes have on us. The same can be said for treatments. So if you are receiving treatment for prostate cancer, perhaps with hormone therapy, there are effects that will affect the health of your muscles and their performance and function over time. So again, you may not be able to control the treatment, but we can control how much that treatment is going to affect our functioning and our muscle health. And lastly, we most certainly do have control over our activity levels. Inactivity is one thing that, because of that demand and response interaction that I mentioned, results in lowered activity and less response from your muscle, which means poor muscle health. So just on that note, I want us all to stand up for a moment and just get some blood flowing through our muscles, because we're going to be here for about 45 minutes. So I'm going to ask everybody to stand up. And I'm not sure, I can't see myself, so I'm not sure how much of me you can see. But what we want to do is take some nice deep breaths. So I'm going to get you to put your hands on your belly, fingers, your long fingers touching each other. And what we're going to do here is we're going to take some nice deep breaths. So we're going to start by breathing in. See if you can get your fingers to move apart from each other, because your belly is filling with air. So what we're doing here is using our diaphragm to fill your lungs entirely so that your fingers come apart and come back together. We want to be breathing throughout our whole torso. Many of us breathe mostly with our chest muscles, and so we want to try and take a nice deep breath. So now, taking a few breaths that way, nice deep breath, and exhale. And now we're going to involve our arms. We're going to take a nice deep breath, breathing in, reaching up as high as you can, stretch, and exhale. I'm going to get you to take another nice big breath. This time, turning sideways. We're going to bend the legs, bend your hips, exhale, and then we're going to roll up. So now we're thinking about all of those vertebrae in your back, rolling one, stacking them one on top of the other, all the way up. Another big breath. Folding forward again. Exhale, bend your knees, straighten them, and roll yourself back up. And then we're going to bring our shoulders back. We're going to tuck the shoulder blades along our back, and we're going to sit down again. So now you've got the blood flowing through a lot of your major muscles. So that's an exercise that anybody who's been to the exercise group is very familiar with, because that's how we start out. So over time, as I said, that there are a lot of changes throughout the body, but specific to the muscles, something called sarcopenia can happen to us. This is an age-related progressive general loss of muscle mass. It is a result of an interaction between all of our systems, so it's actually quite a complex phenomenon. But with regard to our muscles, sarcopenia is defined as being a low muscle mass, a reduced muscle strength, and impaired muscle function. So in this picture, the top picture, we have a muscle that is either healthy or it belongs to somebody who has continued to work and ask their muscle to lift things and carry things. So there's been exercise and activity throughout the lifespan. This muscle is still fairly strong. It takes up most of the circumference of this fellow's bicep, as you can see. On the lower picture, we have a muscle that has been less active, perhaps. It is become infiltrated as the muscle fibers are lost with some fatty tissue. So the muscle itself is less dense. And the muscle is smaller. As you can see on the outside, there's a much larger layer of fat around the muscle surrounding it. However, the circumference of the limbs in both pictures is roughly the same. So I think this is interesting because we may not realize that our muscles are in fact losing some of their mass over time, because we don't see a loss of mass. In fact, there's something called sarcopenic obesity, where we start to gain muscle mass as we age, fat mass as we age, or as a result of treatment. And we, as a result, don't see that the muscles are actually becoming quite a bit smaller. This effect starts when we're in our 30s, and we don't notice it so much because we usually have a fairly good capacity. It starts to pick up its effect once we hit about 60. One of the things that is believed to precede this sarcopenia is muscle weakness. So people who are able to retain the strength in the muscles have been shown to be less likely to develop sarcopenia to the same degree. So this is where we do have some impact on how much we experience this result of aging. So another thing that we don't really have control over is treatment that we may need. I'm going to use hormone therapy as an example here. So this is something that some of you may have experienced. We know that when we reduce the amount of testosterone in the male body, there are changes in body composition, such as an increase in fat mass and a loss of muscle mass and related strength. This is a little bit different from sarcopenia. However, older men who are experiencing sarcopenia will experience perhaps more muscle loss. Another thing that happens with treatment that I think impacts the body composition issue is fatigue. So when we feel fatigued, whether it's the fatigue from being inactive, we don't have very much energy because we're not expending energy, so we feel tired, or fatigue that's related to having cancer. Cancer-related fatigue also is a wearying, very profound weariness, where you probably, if you were going to follow your first inclination, would want to lie on the couch. But we know that exercise and activity is actually the best thing we can do to mitigate loss of muscle mass, increased body fat, as well as fatigue. And lastly, the thing that we certainly do have control over is the amount of activity we have in our lifestyle. Sedentary behavior is defined as any waking behavior that's characterized by low energy expenditure. So usually in a sitting, reclining, or lying posture. So this can be watching TV, working on the computer, it can be time spent in a car if you're traveling, chatting on the phone, visiting with somebody. We know that I should say it is said 70% of people who are over 60 spend most of their time being sedentary. So now I do have to recognize that many of the men that I have met who have prostate cancer do not, I would say, don't fall into that category. That's a generalization. I've met some very impressively active and strong men. But if you are one of the 70% of people who do spend a lot of time, it is worth paying attention to. Sedentary behavior is in fact a separate risk for poor health outcomes. So what I mean by that is that people who are very active and who get in a lot of time exercising or moving in general, but still spend a number of hours over the course of a day in a sedentary position are still at risk for poor health outcomes. So we need to have both things. We need to have an increase in the amount of activity to preserve our muscle health, and we also need to decrease the amount of time that we're sedentary. So those two things go hand in hand, and they're both equally important. Sedentary time affects, as I've said before, all of our body systems. So it has a truly negative effect on our future health. I'm just going to say, so you may be thinking, well, why does all of that matter? I have enough strength to do all the things that I like to do. I still go for walks. I'm not completely sedentary. But we do want to consider the loss of strength as a cumulative effect. And I want to draw your attention to, I guess this is really a worst case scenario. What happens when we become weak? You may be familiar with the term 1 repetition maximum. This is the greatest amount of weight that you could lift at one time. So that would be something that is very, very heavy for you to lift. So I'm going to give you an example of somebody, say somebody named Emily, who is an older person and has not been active perhaps, but the most that she can lift is 15 pounds. Now, the problem here is that some of the things that we do require a lot of, almost that much energy. So Emily's laundry basket weighs 14 pounds, which means that when she wants to pick it up to do the laundry, she is going to be using 95% of her maximum in order to lift that laundry basket. And that being a maximal effort is exhausting. So as Emily goes through her day doing her laundry, lifting her groceries, moving a piece of furniture, or lifting a grandchild, all of that is going to require maximal effort, and she is going to be tired. So I'm not suggesting that I think that you are at this place. This is a place that we want to avoid getting to. On our graph here, what I'm talking about is when the yellow line starts to touch the, or hover just above that threshold of independence. So from there, let's say that we had Emily do some strength training. So let's say that she lifted some weights, and over time she got herself up to being able to lift 20 pounds rather than 15. So now her 14-pound laundry basket is only 70% of her maximal effort, which is a big improvement. So now she's in between these, she's above the yellow line where it hits the independence line. And if she kept going and she was able to lift 25 pounds, then her 14-pound laundry basket would only be 55% of what she can do, of her function, of her capacity for lifting. And that is light activity. 55% is not too difficult. So then she can sail through her day, expending much less energy because she is now up here. She's brought herself back up towards the orange line, and she has between the orange and the blue line a reserve of capacity. So what I want to suggest is that we don't want to get down to the place where Emily was. We can start up here, sorry. The sooner that we start, the closer we can keep our orange line as high as it can be. If we do have to deal with some kind of a loss of function, if we have time away from activity because of a surgery or an illness, it's less work to get back if we haven't lost very much. So the bigger our reserve, the easier we can regain anything that we might lose along the way. And as I said before, what we're wanting to do here is sail along in our orange line until the end of life so that we never have to lose any independence. So along the way, as I said, we're going to increase the reserve. We're going to decrease both regular fatigue and the effect of cancer-related fatigue. And we're going to decrease the effect of sarcopenia. I'm just going to stop here for a moment because I want to point out that when we're talking about loss of muscle mass, so a smaller muscle, the size of that muscle seems to be less important than the strength of those remaining fibers. If you start to lift weight and train your muscles and keep them healthy earlier, you are less likely to develop sarcopenia because you will maintain the strength of the muscles. But if your muscles have become smaller and then you start to exercise, those muscle fibers that are remaining will become stronger, and that will mitigate the effect of sarcopenia because it will improve the functioning of the muscles, so your muscle performance can be increased. So it is never, never too late to start. Activity and physical exercise also reduce the side effects of treatment. And there's quite a few of those. I won't go into all of them today, but specifically the loss of muscle mass that is common with hormone therapy. So I'm just going to pause here. I'm going to get you moving again. So this time we're going to stand up and we're going to move around a little bit. And this is a warm up for something we're going to do in a moment. So I want you to stand up and I'm going to show you a modified jumping jack. So if you've been in my exercise class, you know what this is all about. So we're going to start by whatever you're able to do. And maybe what you want to be doing is raising your arms to your shoulders and stepping to the side and back again. this is a good place. We can step to one side, then the other side, one side, then the other side. You may wish to increase the range that you're doing. So we're going to lift our arms all the way up and all the way down as we step. So we can make this a little more challenging by increasing the speed. Another thing we can do is instead of stepping, we can bounce. So my toes are not leaving the ground, but my heels are. And this is really good for bone health. And lastly, if you're feeling energetic, you can actually jump. So we've arrived at a jumping jack. Okay, so have a seat again, but not for long. So I want to talk to you about now that we know that there are changes in muscles on a cellular level, and there are things that happen to us over the course of our lifespan that can affect the health and the ability and performance of our muscles. So how do we know where to start if we're going to counter some of those effects? Well, I want to talk to you about just some basic litmus tests. These are things that are recognized as being indicative of future wellness. So each of these three things is used as a baseline. So as we work with people, these things can give us a starting base that we can refer to later for marking progress. And so I want to run through three of them with you, which are the sit to stand, your gait speed, and grip strength. So just a word about sit to stand. So this uses both, all of actually strength, endurance, and power. What we're doing here is very simple. We're just starting from a seated position. We're standing up fully. So you'll notice that the woman in the image is fully extending her hips. She's sitting back down again and touching the chair, but not necessarily transferring all of her weight. And then she's standing up again. So what we are going to do here is we are going to time 30 seconds. And if you wish to participate, please do. And if you don't, that's totally fine as well. But I'm going to ask you to stand up and down as fast as you can for 30 seconds and count how many times can you stand up and sit down. So I'm going to show you what this is like. So we're starting from a regular chair, regular height chair. If you have a swivel chair, not ideal because it will move a little bit likely. If you can access a kitchen chair or a dining room chair easily, then that would be a good place to start from. So we're not going to use our arms. However, if you need to, please do. That's totally fine. But we're starting in a seated position, feet comfortably on the floor, and we're going to stand up, sit down, touch the floor, the chair, stand up again, touch. Okay, so I'm going to give you a couple of seconds to get yourself set up, and then I'm going to start my timer, and you're going to count how many that you can do in the 30 seconds. Okay? Okay, everybody ready? 3, 2, 1, begin. As quickly as you can. Be sure to sit all the way down and stand all the way up again. You're nearly there. Keep going. And stop. Okay, you're done. So make a mental note of whatever that number was. Write it down if you need to. And then in the next couple of months, do this again and see where you're at. Is it the same number or has it changed a little bit? So I'm just going to show you, this is the normative values for people. You can look to see what your age, check your age and check your gender, and then just have a look and see what the numbers are and whether you fit into that. I'm guessing that some of you will far exceed those numbers, but they are just a general guideline. Now, when I work with people who are doing this, I have worked with people who are actually not really able to get up very easily from their chair. And so one of the things that I suggest to people is to just throw some of this as a practice into your day. Get up after a meal and sit down again and get up again. So instead of just getting up and walking away from the table, try getting up and sitting down 5 or 10 times even, every time you have a meal or every time you get up from a chair, because now you're increasing the demand that you're placing on those muscles. And this you'll find will become increasingly easy over time. I like this because it's not a formal exercise program, but it most certainly does make a difference. Another thing that, that I think is an easy way to address power is to stand up quickly. So if we were to sit down slowly and then very quickly stand up, we would be using the powerful fibers in our muscles and training those to increase. So whenever we add speed to a movement, that is going to train power in that muscle. The second one is gait speed. So this is something you may not think about too much, but it is definitely correlated in the research with functional ability and with your balance confidence. So this is something that can sneak up on us. You may find over time, people tend to walk more slowly and they take shorter steps. And what I'm suggesting is that you pay attention to this. Maybe this isn't happening to you, but maybe it is. One way that you can mark this, we won't do this now, but is to mark out a 3-meter long section of a hallway or outside of your driveway. Just get a normal construction tape marker or a yardstick or something and measure 3 meters. Have someone time you, walk over that 3-meter pace at your just normal walking speed. Stop when the first foot crosses whatever the 3-meter line is that you've set out. So now just as a one general marker there, 3.8 seconds, if it takes you 3.8 seconds to walk 3 meters, then that is correlated with a fall risk, and that is indicative of the need for you to pay attention to what's going on with your functional fitness. Now it takes 2.2 seconds. If you're at 2.2 seconds, that is the time you need to cross a street before the little man starts blinking. So that kind of speed is going to be correlated with a much better function in terms of everyday activity where we're not worried about falling. So because this is something that can sneak up on you, I tend to suggest that people pay attention to it early. So again, we're trying to be proactive and preventative here. You can do that by when you're out walking, which of course would be a brisk walk. Vary your gait speed, go even faster. Make sure that you're taking big, long strides and vary that as well. This is something that we have done at Norway House when we've done our exercises, and we took a page out of Monty Python and the Ministry of Silly Walks and just made a game of it. It's all very helpful to walk in ridiculous sort of ways is just helpful because it moves all your joints, you step large. It's something that kids enjoy. We've done this with kids. So just a really simple, easy way to be fun and functional. And the last thing is grip strength. So grip strength and having a higher grip strength is associated with a lower risk of all-cause mortality or the risk of dying for any health-related reason. So some people have suggested, some of the researchers have suggested that this is such a powerful indicator, it should be the 6th vital sign. Now, I hadn't really given this much thought, but again, it creeps up on you. And I did notice that even though I'm pretty active, I started to use that little gizmo with the little loop around it to open jars, or I'd hand it off to my husband. And I realized that I do that more now than I used to. So it's natural that we all lose a bit of grip strength. So what I did was I always try my hardest several times before I resort to my little gizmo that helps me take jar lids off. Another way that I think that you can certainly have an impact on your grip strength is to carry things. When you go to the grocery store, grab a basket instead of something with wheels. Throw a few things in it and carry it with one arm. So you want to carry that with your arm hanging down in this kind of a grip. When it gets heavy, transfer it over to your other side. Add a few more things. transfer it back to the first side and back again. And when it gets too heavy, then go and get some wheels and finish your grocery shopping. So I think this is easy because most of us shop somewhere, dollar store, hardware store, grocery store, and without taking any extra time. We're just using the muscles that we have, that we need to be exercising and using to maintain their health. And that is one way to increase your grip strength for sure. So we've talked about what happens with muscles, some of the things we control, some things we can't control. We've talked about some sort of things to keep in mind, to keep tabs on where your strength may be going. If you're going to do something about increasing your capacity and your strength, what are some ideas? What are the things we need to pay attention to? So first of all, I want to talk about inactivity, or the time that we are not moving. We want to decrease our sedentary time. Ideally, we would take some of that time and replace it with light activity. Leisure activity is recreational kind of activity, movement. It tends to be start and stop. It maybe has moments of lots of intensity and moments of inactivity, but combined, it means we're moving around, and it is great stuff. The more of this we can do, the better. We can stimulate the cells and the metabolism in our muscles, the circulation, and keep our muscles healthy. Another thing we can do is structured exercise, and this is where we're continuously repetitive, we're doing repetitive, purposeful movement in order to have some kind of a health benefit. And the last thing I'm going to mention is what we call movement snacks. This is kind of a new thing that has been studied recently and is also beneficial. So let's start with talking about sedentary time. Excuse me. So I encourage you to just have a think about how many hours, truthfully, you spend in minimal activity. Counting those up and thinking about how that balances against the amount of activity you do get, but remembering that this is a separate risk issue. So the recommendation is that we replace the moments that we're not, or the times that we're not active, with light activity. But of course, we know that we are all going to spend some time sitting around. And it is in fact not all that difficult to mitigate the effect of that sedentary behavior. So the recommended amount is that every 2 hours you should be moving for 5 minutes, which isn't really all that much, but it is enough to stimulate all of the systems that are involved, circulation, etc., so that the effect of the sedentary time is reduced. So what I suggest is that every 20, 30 minutes when you're doing something, you get up, walk around a little bit, go and get a drink perhaps, let the dog out, something like that. Now, I know that there are things that are so engrossing. It is not really possible to get up after 20 or 30 minutes, but you still can do something about that sedentary time. So if you're in a seated position and it's just too good to look away, you can still do arm circles, you can do bicep curls, you can raise your heels, you can extend your knees, you can stretch. And all of that is helpful. So leisure activity. So this would be recreation, hobbies, things like light gardening, golf. This is different from physical activity because it doesn't tend to have the prolonged intensity, but it still nourishes our joints. It brings joint fluid into our big joints, which provides nourishment to the cartilage, which is awesome, and circulation of blood into our muscles. So when we talk about exercise for men with prostate cancer, we often focus on aerobic and resistance training. There's all kinds of research that shows that resistance and aerobic training is very beneficial in terms of an outcome and mitigating effects of treatment and fatigue. But in fact, there is a study out there that shows that in fact all types of activity, including leisure activity, are beneficial. So we want to fill as much of our day as we can with informal and casual activity. After that, we're going to talk about structured exercise. Aerobic exercise is going to benefit your cardiorespiratory system. So this is where we're asking our heart to beat a little bit faster. It needs to be continuously in terms of your heart getting to a steady state, so for 10 minutes or more. The recommendations currently for men who have prostate cancer and people who are over the age of 69 are that we do 150 minutes of aerobic activity per week, spread throughout the week, such as five bouts of 30 minutes. And it needs to be at moderate to vigorous activity. So now this intensity is really, really important because this is the difference between a structured exercise and leisure activity. The 150 minutes need to be comprised of exercise that is moderate, which means that say if you're walking at a pace such that you are out of breath because you have to breathe harder. That is how you know that this is a moderate level of activity. So walking is actually, unless you are walking so fast that you are breathing heavily, it is more of a leisure activity because it doesn't quite have the intensity that we need, although it most certainly benefits your muscles and your joints and your overall health. So I don't want to minimize the positive effect of leisure activity, but I do want to point out that aerobic activity is more strenuous. We also can do resistance training, which is lifting anything, using our muscles against resistance. So the recommendations here are that we perform resistance training twice a week using all of our major muscle groups, which would be 6 to 8 different exercises. And this is traditionally reps and sets that we can talk about too in a moment. The last thing in structured exercise where we have recommendations are with regard to flexibility and balance. So the Canadian recommendations are that we look out for some flexibility every time we do some exercise. So this is static stretching where we're holding a stretch for 30 to 60 seconds at the point where you start to feel a little bit of discomfort. When we're dealing with flexibility, it is something, in order to have a cumulative effect, it needs to be done most days of the week. So if your goal is to get your hands on the ground when you're doing a forward fold, you would need to make sure that you're working at that most days over time to get that kind of progress. And lastly, balance. So the Canadian guidelines recommend that we look at balance if we feel that it's compromised, but I really feel that this is something we can be proactive about because it is much easier to retain your balance than to try and get it back after you've started to falter. So I am going to delve into aerobic and resistance training a little bit more. So I've got a little detour here. Aerobic training, where we're asking our heart to work harder, gives us a lot of benefit. So again, heart's a muscle. And when we walk or swim or ride our bikes or hike fast enough that our heart has to work harder because we are providing more oxygen to our muscles, there is a whole bunch of benefit. So I want to talk about this because I think it's really cool. The first thing that happens is in your lungs. When you start to demand more from your body, your lungs respond by becoming more efficient at actually taking the oxygen out of your lungs, out of the air, and getting it into the red blood cells of your blood. So that becomes more efficient. Your circulatory system responds because your heart as a muscle will get stronger. Your blood may develop more red blood cells so that it can carry more oxygen. We have an increase in circulation, so there's increased vascularization, little arterioles in our extremities so that they can provide more air to our working muscles. And lastly, at the muscles themselves, we have an increase in the efficiency of the cells in the muscles that drive the transfer of energy. So the little mitochondria that I mentioned further, the powerhouses, become more efficient at taking the oxygen out of the blood and turning it into energy that the muscles use to contract. And over time, an exercising muscle will develop even more of these little cells, mitochondria, so that there's an increased efficiency in that way as well. So all of this results in, similar to when we're increasing our strength away from that maximum effort we need when we lift things, we're building a reserve so that we have less fatigue when we do stuff. The more that we do aerobic exercise, the greater the reserve we have and the less fatigue. So this is a spiraling up rather than a spiraling down. So there's like a whole universe of things that are going on inside your body when you're doing aerobic exercise. It's very cool. So with regard to resistance training, so here we're doing tradition. I'm going to refer to sort of the traditional way of doing resistance training. There's lots of other ways and new ways that are being used, but we're going to talk about reps and sets just briefly here. So many of you are probably familiar with this. So if you were to do a press here, so I'm going to lift up. Feel free to join me if you have weights on hand and you'd like to. I'm going to lift up here doing a shoulder press. So I'm going to go 3 times. Those are the reps. I'm going to rest now, and then I'm going to do another 3 reps. And that is a second set. So I've done 2 sets of 3 repetitions. When we're building the endurance of the muscle, the ability of that muscle to keep going and going. So for instance, somebody who's jogging, who's doing a long distance run, we're going to do less weight so that we can do many, many repetitions. So for here, we would be looking at doing 3 sets of 15 to 20 repetitions. Now we do something different if our goal is to develop the strength, so is to be able to lift an actual greater amount of mass. In that case, we would do more sets, but fewer reps with more weight. So we're asking the muscle to lift more weight. It's going to be harder when we get to so we would do 3 sets of 10 for this, or 8. When we get to the last set, we would be pretty much tuckered out and not really able to do more than 1 or 2. So for strength, we're doing 2 to 4 sets of 8 to 12 repetitions. Now, when we're going to train for power, we have to drop the amount of weight because we're going to add speed. So in this sense, we have less weight now, but we're going to push quickly, come back slowly, push quickly. The same as we did with the sit to stand where we stood up quickly. And this is going to train the ability of that muscle to respond with power. So those are the 3 of the different ways that we can train using resistance. And that resistance can be just about anything. We can use body weight, we can use bands, we can use dumbbells, we can use machines. If you're in the garden, you can use rocks. It really doesn't matter. The important thing is that you're doing whatever amount of weight gets you to the feeling that you're working moderately as you measure your effort. There are lots of ways to train balance. So one of the things that I have done for a long time is when I'm in the grocery store, I stand on 1 foot when I'm at the checkout because I'm already there. I've got something I can hold on to if I need to. And so while I wait, I stand on 1 leg. I like this because I really like to fit this stuff in wherever I can, such as carrying my groceries. So what that does, when you're standing on 1 leg, you're training your neurological system to be aware of where your body is in space. You're strengthening the big muscles in the leg that you're standing on. But you're probably thinking about balance as you're doing that. So there's another part of balance that I want to draw your attention to. And this is an app that was developed by a physiotherapist in Australia. And you can Google this. If you looked up clockyourself.com, there is a wealth of information about balance, about the factors that influence balance and what you can do to increase your balance. This is all based in evidence. It's really excellent information. The app is available for any smartphone. It's under $3. And essentially, you'll find yourself in the middle of a circle of numbers or the months of the year. And you are going to be asked to step towards one distance and transfer your weight and come back. This is training the stepping response. which is in an unpredicted way. So because when we do tend to wobble, usually we're not thinking about our balance. It's usually something unexpected. So this app can train the reaction time that you have. It has a lot of different levels in it, and it can be quite fun. We use it in the exercise group at Norway House. Okay, so we've got reducing sedentary time, we've got leisure activity, we've got structured exercise, and I want to talk about movement snacks. So what is a movement snack? So there's been some research recently about interspersing into your life, as I've been talking about, just small bouts of activity. Wherever you happen to be, natural movement in whatever you happen to be doing. So people at McMaster looked at this, and there's some research also out of UBC in the Okanagan that has shown that this is an effective way to increase your capacity and promote a positive, healthy outcomes over time. So I've talked about some of these, your laundry, your grocery basket, other things that you can do. Maybe you can do squats while you're brushing your teeth. This person is going upstairs, and I want to note too, interestingly, there's also a benefit to going downstairs. So for some people, if your knees are not up to going upstairs, you find that difficult, so you use the elevator. By all means, if you're able, go down the stairs. Though there's not the same aerobic benefit, there is a significant metabolic benefit to using your muscles going downstairs.
Oh, my screen seems to have paused.
I think somebody's frozen.
Oh, did we lose Joy there?
Yeah.
Okay, just give her a second. I think it just paused out. If you guys just bear with us. Just give it a minute here, and we'll see if she can pop back in.
It was going so well.
It was.
Famous last words, right?
Oh,
This doesn't work for everybody. I do know people who prefer to exercise alone, but sometimes having a partner, your spouse or a friend or neighbor, family member, is a great way to motivate. Another thing you can do is start small, especially if you are at the beginning and you're just thinking about starting something. Making sure that whatever you're starting with is something that is very manageable is a really useful tool. So for example, if you're thinking you need to start to do 5 30-minute walks, brisk walks a week, and you haven't been doing any, that's probably going to be a long-term goal. And it might be a better idea to start with something smaller, 5 or 10-minute walk. When you've actually done that, chances are people keep on going and they extend their short walk into a longer one. But if they don't, you can still tick off that you did what you set out to do and you've reached your goal, and you can feel really good about that. That experience of success is actually really powerful, especially as we start out. Another thing that people do is they keep a record through, could be one of those Fitbits, some kind of technology on your computer or phone, or an actual record. But this is another tool that has been shown to be effective in keeping people on track. So what if you may be thinking, I have a joint issue, I have arthritis, or I have a frozen shoulder, I experience discomfort and pain, maybe I have an injury that's not healed, or maybe I've just never exercised before. I really and truly strongly believe that it is possible to start wherever you are and find a way to enhance your capacity, no matter where your beginning point is. So the woman in the middle of this slide is using what's called an arm ergometer. So for whatever reason, she's not using her lower body right now. I just bought one of these things for my mom. She fractured her pelvis, so she is not able to walk very well or sit on a stationary bike. But It cost $80, and she uses that at her table to get an aerobic workout and also a bit of an endurance workout on her arms. So there's ways that we can exercise other parts of the body. For example, the way that we do this, I call scaling. So here we're going to look at wherever you are starting. We're going to work with whatever the range of motion that you have available to you, and whatever amount of weight is going to give you that effect that you feel like you're working hard. It might be 3 pounds, it might be 30 pounds. It really, the number doesn't matter. Once we start to do some basic exercise within the parameters of wherever you're at, we can generally know that we're going to be able to increase the range of motion. And as we strengthen, generally there's an analgesic effect to movement, and with strengthening becomes a reduction in the amount of discomfort that we feel. I do know people who have expressed to me that they feel like lifting weights once they hit 70, 75 is not really safe anymore. And I want to say to you that, in fact, our bodies are very, very resilient. And that the flip side of that is the risk of being weak. So being weak is in fact very, very costly to us, because we end up at the bottom of the independence line that I showed you earlier on the graph. We don't have to end up being weak. We can really make a difference in the way that we age so that weakness is not the outcome. If you're not sure, be sure to, of course, check with your physician. You can check with an exercise professional like myself or a physiotherapist who can clear you for many kinds of exercise if you have other conditions that you're considering, and who can help you come up with a safe exercise plan. So remember that activity keeps muscles healthy. Muscles respond to the demand that is placed on them, or to a lack of demand that is placed on them. And strong functional fitness sets us up for a higher quality of life, prolonged independence, and a reduced risk of future ill health. So I wonder if you might have any questions, but first I want to draw your attention to the photo here on this slide. This is a picture of a movement snack. The woman on the left is working on her balance by walking down the curb instead of on the pavement. So I like that because she's out for a walk anyway. She has her partner to give her some stabilization, but she's still working on her balance. Thank you.